And now it's my honor to introduce our next speaker, Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. I'll do a very brief introduction, Secretary. He's joining by Zoom, so those of us in the room can see up on screen, and everybody else will see on their screen. Pete Buttigieg serves as the 19th Secretary of Transportation, having been sworn in on February 3rd, 2021. His focus as secretary is to deliver the world's leading transportation system for the American people and economy. He's worked to achieve organizational excellence in the department's operations and to focus the department on 5 policy goals: safety, jobs, equity, climate, and innovation. Of course, the timing of entering the role was a perfect match with one of the largest disruptions in the supply chain that we've all seen, and we've participated in that. It was also the timing of the initiation of our committee, and we appreciate all of the work and leadership that you provided over this crisis and our ability to get out of it, and look forward to your remarks today. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for bearing with me on having to shift gears and join you virtually, but I didn't want to miss a chance to spend a little time with you, and most importantly, to thank you, as well as my colleagues at the Commerce Department and Secretary Raimondo for your leadership. You said it just right in the intro. I think a lot of us took on these supply chain questions just in our case at the department with regard to our new activities just slightly before, and in your case, sometimes years before, they became a household term. Supply chains used to be a term of art for industry insiders and transportation buffs. Now it's very much on everybody's minds, mainly as a consequence of all of the ways that our supply chains were subjected to such upheaval during COVID. Big part of our focus is to make sure that even if the worst of the upheaval, at least that particular flavor of upheaval, is behind us, that what we shouldn't put behind us is the attention and the sense of urgency around strengthening our supply chains, around shoring them up, and for that matter, shoring them a little closer to home where possible. And I think in this moment right now, where it feels like so many things are on fire around the world and in our domestic situation, it's that much more important to pay attention to the fundamentals, not least because there are so many indications that one of the main things that we need to continue to do in the fight against inflation is to ensure that supply chains are smooth and work well for Americans. So I want to thank everyone on this committee for your service and your contributions, especially knowing the kinds of claims that are being made on your time. They really are helping to shape really important and in some cases once in a lifetime decisions that we're making on everything from infrastructure development to long-term macroeconomic policy. I do think it's worth pausing for a moment just to think about how much has changed in a year or 2 years or 3 years with regard to our supply chains. And part of that is something that I think I will be reminded of for the rest of my life anytime the month of October comes near, because it was in October of 2021, exactly 2 years ago, that we started to see proclamations that Christmas was going to be canceled because nobody would be able to get anything that they needed. Small businesses were struggling to get supplies that they needed. Large industry obviously was feeling the pinch. We had a bow wave of about 100 ships bearing down on the West Coast, having all pretty much left China or Asia at the same time. And every part of the system, from trucking to warehousing to ports, was under strain. Importantly, as tough as that season was, Christmas wasn't canceled. As a matter of fact, by that very same winter that followed that very same fall, what we experienced was an all-time record high in the throughput of goods through America's ports. And what it took to weather that particular strain included, of course, a lot of work from the administration, a lot of work from you and organizations like those that you lead, and a lot of work from the workers who make it all happen. So I'm thankful to everybody who's part of that. And again, I want to make sure that even if the acuity of that particular moment has left us, what shouldn't leave us are the lessons of that moment and the discovery, because I think it was a discovery for much of the American public and even for a lot of the policy world, of just how vulnerable or fragile or susceptible to disruption so many of our supply chains were. But I will say the work that has been done has gone a long way. Economists believe one of the main reasons why inflation is down so much compared to a year ago is the work that has been done to reduce shipping costs and other supply chain inefficiencies. So now the point obviously is very much not to get America's supply chains to look like what they looked like just before the pandemic. A 2019 status quo is not attractive. It was fine on a good day, but not able to handle a disruption. Our goal is to strengthen these supply chains and bring more of their elements home to American soil so that they are not just fair weather supply chains, but one that can withstand everything that's coming at them. Let me very briefly update you on a few things that DOT is doing toward that. And hopefully you will find that these steps rhyme with the work of your committee and some of the recommendations that you've made. First, we are thrilled to show that we have stood up and opened the doors of our new freight office in the Department of Transportation. It sits within OST, the Office of the Secretary, which means it has a direct line to me and the visibility that's needed across the different modes. And it's an office we're committed to growing. We've already brought on an experienced Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multimodal Freight, and we're going to continue to keep you updated on everything that's going on there and keep you plugged in, because we've got to continue to make sure that that work is being informed by your experience and that we have a good and nimble feedback loop there. Second, we're continuing to develop what we call FLOW, Freight Logistics Optimization Works is what it stands for. We've got more and more numbers of participants in this. It's about making sure that you all have access to a data infrastructure to make the most of America's physical infrastructure. It was built out of the insight that a lot of different players, from ocean shippers to beneficial cargo owners to port operators to trucking companies, turned out not to have as much information as people might assume that they did about the movement of goods. And without a massive budget or very particular authorities, but really on a handshake, we were able to bring together parties who are now helping to share the data to make this really operational and really useful, and continue to be a big believer in what we're doing with FLOW. Third, we're working with the state departments of transportation to inform a better national understanding of freight needs and investment opportunities. Obviously, most freight networks don't end at a state line, but the work of the states, which at the end of the day are deploying the majority of the funds, even the federal funds that are going out, aren't always fitted to a sense of a national policy or a national big picture. So we're working with states to use those insights to try to make sure that we're making the right investments and that they are thinking about each other in a more integrated way when they're making their decisions. Fourth, we are continuing to advance really exciting supply chain beneficial investments through the discretionary funding that is at our control, that doesn't just go out to the states. And it's incredibly rewarding when I get to go out on the road and go to places like Port Miami, where I was next week, where we're increasing the capacity and resiliency there, or a freight rail project we're doing in Elkhart, Indiana, close to where I grew up, that not only enhances fluidity of goods movement in that spot, but also makes that no longer a place that trains back up directly in the path of hundreds of students walking to a high school. So there are community benefits and obviously major macroeconomic benefits to the thousands of projects we have underway, so many of which are improving freight rail or roads or bridges or ports or waterways or any of the other elements that we count on, all part of the president's infrastructure law. And just the fifth thing I want to mention, the trucking action plan. I was just in South Dakota a few weeks ago where we're funding new truck parking. That's something we're also doing in Texas, in Florida, in Louisiana, and a lot of other places. Truck parking is a great example of an unglamorous issue that is actually proving to be a life safety issue. And ultimately a supply chain issue, because it's becoming a factor in our ability as a country to recruit and retain the kind of truck drivers we need, who sometimes will leave the career because of issues like the inability to find convenient, reliable, predictable access to safe parking. And speaking of recruiting and retaining, other thing I've been doing is visiting community colleges where we're funding training for veterans to get CDLs. I think about some of the people that I occasionally had to recruit to volunteer to join me when I was leading a ground movement between Bagram and Kabul that was notorious for IEDs. Obviously, these are the kinds of people who can be relied on. I think they can handle I-95. And I think many of them are looking for good careers. that are available to them when they come off active duty. And so we've been able to buy down the cost of CDL training for a lot of veterans, and it's an exciting pipeline into a really important career. So those are just 5 things I wanted to make sure you had a sense of. The big picture is that we have both policy attention and almost unprecedented hard dollars going into these supply chain issues and opportunities. And the last remark I'll make is that, of course, what most of our supply chains have in common is that they're not owned and operated by the federal government. And so we are working from the outside in with the resources and policy tools we have, but knowing that it is players like you, like the folks at this table and the different constituencies and communities that you're helping give a voice to, that are actually going to rise and fall on this work and have to do so much of the work, which is why we count on the insights of this body to help make sure we're getting it right and to quickly flag things that we need to either tear out of the way or double down on in order to help everyone succeed. Let me stop there. I think we have a little time for questions, but again, really appreciate the chance to fill you in on some of our work.
Thank you, Secretary Buttigieg. Questions for the Secretary? Jason?
Sure. Jason Craig from C.H. Robinson. I just want to express my enthusiasm for the launching of the U.S. Freight Office and thank Andrew Peterson for coming out to the Minnesota Freight Advisory Committee as part of his due diligence in standing up that office. C.H. Robinson's also an original participant in Flow as well. But what I wanted to highlight for you is an opportunity that I think industry has, both shippers and brokers with the federal FMCSA to improve safety. And I was fortunate to be able to host Administrator Hutchison this summer and show her how freight brokers use data from FMCSA to hire safe carriers, to select safe motor carriers and do proper due diligence. However, there's increasing confusion about what data we should be looking at. And the more clear that FMCSA can be, the safer a system we can have. So I encourage you to work with Administrator Hutchison to be more clear in the communication with industry on what data industry should be looking at, so the whole system can improve and we can be a force multiplier for FMCSA.
Great. Well, thanks for that note. I'll make sure to take that back and see what we can do to make it as straightforward and predictable as possible. And thanks for being early at the table on Flow. We really believe in that. And again, I'm often amazed by what you can do in addition to what you can do with huge sums and major authorities. I'm amazed by what you can do on a handshake, and the way that you and other parties came together to make Flow happen is something we really value.
Gene, did you want to ask a question or two?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Secretary, good to see you, and thanks for all that you're doing to help us out. With the recent announcement of the 7 hydrogen hubs nationwide, how's that going to shape our next sprint on pushing out the IIJA and IRA money to these and other areas? I know it's a big deal for you and the agency.
Yeah, thanks for the question. We're excited, and I think sprint is the right word. And we're balancing our sense of urgency and our desire to move quickly with an awareness that we also have to get this right the first time, because this is such a unique opportunity that won't come again. We've built some terrific connective tissue with the Department of Energy that didn't used to be there around a different effort, which is our EV effort. We have a Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, which was stood up with very healthy funding through the IIJA to help integrate things like the relationship between our expertise on highways and their expertise on the grid, both of which you need in order to figure out where chargers are going to go, just to take one example. And I want us to take that muscle that we built and use it to be very well coordinated on this, because we know that the formation of these hydrogen hubs, which we're so excited about, is going to both require supply chains and the right kind of infrastructure networks to get them built up to their capacity and potential. And it's going to shape the way that our transportation networks operate in the long term. To take another example from a different field, we've been doing a number of port infrastructure development projects that have been relevant to wind, offshore wind. In the past, we might have been able to do one of those every year or every few years as a department. So we were never really compelled to examine the question of what a national picture and policy that was comprehensive about where all the offshore wind is shaping up across the U.S. on all of our coasts was, and what kind of port capacity would be needed to serve it, right? Now we actually have to entertain questions like that, because it might matter if we might do 2 or 3 in the same round. It might matter to know just how much is needed on one coast or another coast over the next 10 years. It's just problems we never had to think about. It's a great position to be. It's a great problem to have. But it compels us to be more strategic and more holistic. I think you're going to say the same thing happening around the hydrogen hubs. You add to that the potential that hydrogen has for the hard to decarbonize parts of transportation. Certainly maritime, as you know better than anybody, but also around aviation and some trucking and other freight applications. And we've got to make sure we're ready, and we've got to also make sure that we're conscious as Americans that there's a race here. You know, we lost a beat on the EV front, and I think we're still making up for lost time after some years when China in the past was allowed to build an advantage while we had an administration in the U.S. that was more allergic to EVs and missed some chances to take leadership. We can't let that happen again, and we're very mindful of needing to be out front on hydrogen, working with our partners and allies, of course, but we always want to be a step ahead of our peers.
Other questions for the Secretary? Ian?
This is Secretary Ian Jeffries with the AAR. Good to see you again, and thanks for the open, positive relationship we have. You and I had a conversation a little bit about this a few weeks back, but looking at the southern border and the challenges that we're seeing and the balance of security, managing the influx of individuals with the need to keep commerce flowing. Can you comment at all on how, obviously you're not the lead agency on this, but how you're able to work with DHS to one, help coordinate and get an understanding of, you know, when we might see these issues coming down the pike, and how business might better prepare in advance any way possible of closures forthcoming to the extent that you have advance notice.
Yeah, and thanks for the steady and open dialogue that we've maintained. I think it's especially important when things like this come up. Even since I last spoke with you about this, I've had a chance to raise it with my counterpart, the Mexican minister in charge of infrastructure, because obviously it's a security concern, it's an enforcement concern. It's largely in that DHS world, but it's very much an infrastructure and commercial concern. And we have been able to build a capacity as an administration to recognize how there are complex interdependencies. Just to draw, again, another example from another field. I went up traveling on short notice to meet with the president of Mexico and all of his assembled folks, because it was the only way to get resolution for an issue our cargo air carriers were facing at the airport. It was just of such interest to their government that it required head of government level engagement to get it unstuck. And we're going to continue to be willing to push every button that we can to get more certainty, get more predictability. And that also means a lot of work to speak with one voice as an administration, knowing the complexity of the chessboard, where issues ranging from fentanyl to harmonization of aviation standards are all part of the same big picture. But I appreciate you raising this, because I don't think we should fall into the trap of being perceived as being more attentive to this in a way that's somehow at the expense of humanitarian concerns or the human side of things. You know, the safe and secure, as well as efficient and appropriate and legal movement of goods is so important to people's prosperity, as is having safe and efficient and appropriately managed movement of people. And so I think it very much deserves to be in all of these conversations, and we're going to keep it there.
Thank you for that.
Other questions for the Secretary? Looking online. Okay, Secretary Buttigieg, thank you for joining us. Thanks especially for the partnership across departments. This is a Department of Commerce Advisory Committee, but the tight working relationship with DOT has been super valuable for us. And as you know, many of the participants in this committee also support things like flow, and we're grateful for your leadership.
Likewise, and thanks again to you and your Commerce colleagues for all the great work.
Thank you.